Hello, and welcome to NAEA's 11th Town Hall Conversation, the first one for the 2021-22 school year. We're so glad that you can join us. We're doing a back to school community check-in, and we have some very special guests who you will meet shortly. I'm going to invite our guests to go ahead and turn their cameras on for us. I'm Mario Rosero. I have the great privilege and honor of being the executive director of the National Art Education Association. And I always like to proudly say that I am a former visual art classroom teacher in the elementary and middle school, both in Pittsburgh and Chicago, and also served as a district arts administrator in both of those cities. And I'm so thrilled to be here in our community where we can share news of what we are facing, both in terms of challenges, opportunities, and successes. So before we get started, I always like to take a moment to do a native land acknowledgement. I am home in Washington, D.C., which is home of the Piscataway. And one of the reasons that we take a moment to acknowledge is that we realize that not every person or every group of people has had the opportunities and has been afforded the equity and inclusion that we are striving for, both historically and in the present. So we like to start with truth and acknowledgement, that we are all working to do our best to move towards greater equity and inclusion in our work. So thank you for that. And I urge everyone, if you go to nativelands.ca, there is a place that you can search for the local, whether it's native or indigenous, you can identify in your own backyard. So before we get started tonight, I wanted to mention that closed caption is an option under live transcript, and that once we jump into the conversation, speaker view is the recommended view for the conversations. We also know that it's been quite a 19 months of ups and downs, and we send our good energy and thoughts to all of you and our colleagues across the country and internationally for weathering this and staying proactive and positive. And thanks again for joining us. So we host our town hall conversations to have real live in-person conversations with colleagues on the issues and the ideas that we're facing right now. And this tonight is a moment to check in with where are we coming from and how are we coming into this school year, right? Everyone's been back to school now for a few weeks for most folks, longer for others because I know school calendars have changed. But our town hall conversation is a long conversation format. And essentially, it's pairings that sort of function as a relay of conversations. So I'll explain this a little bit. We'll start with person A as interviewer, person B as interviewee. They'll have 6 minutes on the clock. At 5 minutes, you'll hear a ding or a chime if needed, and there'll be a wrap up for that conversation. And then person A will exit. Person B stays and becomes the interviewer, and person C comes in as the interviewee. Now look, either that all makes sense to you or it doesn't, but you don't have to worry because you're going to see it firsthand and it always works out beautifully. But what it does give us is a way to see and watch a conversation thread move across different perspectives. And that's really what we're all about. So please know we invite you to stay very active in the chat, and to the degree possible, we'll ask our panelists to also engage in the chat when they can. And so if you have questions, comments, please make sure you put it there and we will respond as best we can. My team is behind the scenes ready to do that. And we will do our best to leave time for Q&A at the end, but we often get carried away with our conversation. So the chat is really our best option. We are also streaming on Facebook Live. So, and this conversation is being recorded and will be available on the NAE website afterwards. So with that, I think that we are ready to jump into our first conversation. So it's really my great privilege and honor to welcome Wanda Knight to the first conversation. And Wanda, I have to offer my big congratulations. You have a new role that we're so proud of. So I'm going to introduce you in your new role as Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Associate Professor of Art Education, African American Studies, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Penn State University, Harrisburg. And you're also our NAEA President-elect. Wanda, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Mario.
I'm so glad you're here with us. So we're just going to jump right in to our members have all submitted questions. So our whole conversation this evening is based off of the audience's questions that are on top of their minds. So Dawn from Illinois wants to know, what suggestion do you have for those of us who work in a building where morale is at an all-time low?
Thank you, Dawn, for that question. Well, if leaving is not an option, then I think it's important to build and maintain emotional resilience. There are various ways that you can do this, Dawn, and others. I believe you can seek out positive coworkers, avoid being drawn into negative conversations about other toxic coworkers or an administrator. In doing so, you can focus on solutions and not on complaints. You can also create a positive workspace. You can play soft music, hang artwork, decorate your walls with positive posters and inspirational quotes and pictures of people that you love. Also, I think you can look for the good. Everything isn't bad and wrong all the time. I always like to say even a broken clock is right twice a day. With that said, write down everything positive about your situation, particularly when you're down. Think about reading your list. Keep your focus on the positive and good as much as possible. I think you should also strive for work-life balance. Leave the negativity at work if possible. It was hard to do that when we were blurring the lines between home and school, but now we're sort of back in the mix. And remember that we have a happy life, and your job isn't all consuming. Also, sometimes we need to seek help because working in a toxic environment can erode our mental health. So if the stressors interfere with your day-to-day functioning, you might need to seek the help of a mental health professional. But I also say you might need to create an exit strategy. Take small steps toward really building a brighter future. For example, look at other job opportunities, update your resume. When you do things like that, you tell your brain that your situation won't be that way forever.
These are really, really helpful tips. And I think this next question is a little bit connected to this. It's along the same lines. So Nicole from Maine is curious, how would you suggest managing burnout in the art educator position? And how does one stay motivated?
Thank you, Nicole, too, for your question. They really are pretty similar. So I think I'm going to put on a principal's hat, for example, like I've had in the past. I think as a principal, I did some things to help teachers manage burnout and stay motivated. For example, I encourage them to be as flexible as possible. Avoid trying to do business as usual during unusual and difficult times. We have to just be flexible. I really do a lot of encouraging mindfulness. I think that's really critical because research has shown that mindfulness builds resilience. Whenever we're anxious, we're stressed or overwhelmed, mindfulness helps us be aware of things happening around us in the present. That is without dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. I also feel as though I modeled an attitude of gratitude because I believe having such an attitude can help people stay motivated. I made a point, for example, of regularly expressing gratitude and complimenting my teachers on some aspect of their work performance. For example, I go out and buy payday candy bars, and I might put a note in it that says, "You deserve an extra payday given your hard work." And then I might name the situation that I was referring to. And also I would motivate my teachers to keep their spirits high by sometimes I'd come in and I'd teach their classes and I say, go take a break. And that would also encourage them to be, have higher spirits and be motivated.
That's great. Wanda, remind me, so you were a principal for, was it K-8?
I've been a principal, yes, K-8 of 3 different schools. And one of the schools I was an inaugural principal of, in which I hired teachers and wrote curriculum and did all of those things. And that particular school became an arts-focused school.
I love that, especially building from the ground up. Those are such special and unique moments. So Diane from Texas asks, what should be the role of enriched and creative teaching and learning in K-12 art classrooms? So this is a bit of a bigger picture question.
Yeah, it is. Diane, thank you. And thank you for making my brain really be challenged this evening. You know, since it's bigger picture, I won't get too much in the specifics, maybe toward one of the final comments that I'll make, but we recognize that art exists in all cultures. I think that's really important to acknowledge. And I believe that the big picture of art, it really should challenge us to see ourselves and others in very different ways. I think art, when we move beyond just the principles and the you know, the not only the principles of art and things such as that, then art can provoke us. Whatever themes, symbols, representations we use, it can inspire us. I believe art should inspire. And I talked a bit about those posters, for example, that could be sources of inspiration. I believe art should be used to reveal what is really hidden. And some of those things in societies are hidden. For example, I think art should be used to tear down barriers. I'm thinking about cultural and linguistic barriers. And art can help us face difficult truths. And what I'm thinking about is an example of where one young lady took home, one of my students, kindergarten, took home a picture of having drawn her mother, and her mother was pretty bothered, thought her daughter wasn't doing good art. And the little girl said, "This is you, mommy." And the mother questioned it, and it had two little circles at the top and one huge circle at the bottom. And the mother said, "How is that me?" And the little girl said, "Well, that's you, mommy." And she says, "How?" She says, "Well, you yell all the time. So the nostrils, you look up the nostrils, and this is the mouth that's open. So the two dots were the nostrils, it's the large mouth standing over the child yelling." So that does help us face difficult truths. So those are some of the examples, for example, the art in the big scheme of things, what it might do.
And boy, I remember my own students in the classroom, they're so honest with their work, right? They know no other way to make it. And it all, that expression always comes out.
Absolutely.
So our next to last question. So just, in your current role in NAEA, I'm curious, what are you most focused on right now for members?
Well, thank you for that question. This is such a critical role, and I want everybody to have a genuine opportunity to thrive. So I'm focused on mostly on breaking barriers and expanding pathways so that all will really have a genuine opportunity to thrive within our association. That's so important to me. And I'm really focused also on anti-racism and racial justice work, and really designing it to uproot historically racist systems and replace them with equitable policies, practices, and procedures. Those tend to be my focus for right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wanda. And then we always like to wrap up our pairings of conversations with this question, which is, what are your tips for self-care right now? Or in other words, what are you doing for your own self-care?
Well, what I'm doing thank you for that question. So it's so important. If you remember, and a scholar who passed kind of prematurely. Sometimes people think when we take care of ourselves, it's self-indulgence, but Audre Lorde says it's not self-indulgence. It's really important that we take care of ourselves. And I'm going to continue to encourage this because most of my topic has focused on mindfulness and this kinds of practices. So I do practice healthy thinking, and I'm encouraging people to do something very similar. And I use internal reflection to maintain emotional and psychological well-being and resilience. I think those are really critical. So my daily routine, most of the time, is I start my day with prayer and meditation. This includes visualization. And then again, when we think about visualizing what we want our day to be like, how we're going to make the day, as opposed to letting it happen to us. And this includes deep breathing, really to center myself. And when I think I'm the busiest and I have no time for this kind of practice, it's the time that I really need to do it. So throughout the day, I stay in the present moment, which helps me maintain, again, perspective. At the end of each day, I take some time to draw, maybe scribbling, it may be doodling, and I journal expressions of gratitude, recognizing that there is much for which I'm grateful, despite challenging times and unusual circumstances.
Thank you, Wanda. Our time goes so quickly, but I appreciate our conversation, and I'm going to go ahead and take my exit and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Evan Thomas. He's joining me in the conversation. Evan is a fine arts educator at Blair Academy in New Jersey, and he's a member of the NAEA Cultural Competency in Teaching and Leadership Certificate Program Pilot. Welcome, Evan.
Thanks so much, Wanda. Excited to talk to you. Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Evan, Heidi from California submitted a great question. She says, how are you managing instruction for students who miss school because they contract COVID?
Yeah, we're starting off here with the good questions. Thank you for that, Heidi. The first thing that comes to mind is with empathy. Regardless of personal health status, lots of people are dealing with a lot, navigating a lot right now. And so one of the things that I've worked to do is be proactive in kind of making changes to systems that I use in the classroom that benefit everybody, right? Like before anybody is missing any school, what can I do to make the art experience a little more accessible to everybody? And so some of those things in my space have looked like kind of continuing the COVID keeps, right? Like every kid is still getting an art kit that I tell them to bring to class, or they can take it home if they need to. Recording demos that I give and keeping my resource library alive, curating digital resources, again, that kids can refer to when they're in the space or if they're at home. Same thing with the digital portfolios, really leaning into that. I just use a Google slide template. And so that's a space for kids to document their work. It's a built-in space for feedback and a place that I can give feedback in the classroom space or outside the classroom space. I think you're seeing a theme here. If students are away for a longer period of time, I'd certainly consider maybe recording entire classes or maybe digging into some pre-planned activities. Maybe throughout this semester, everybody's expected to do some type of contemporary art response. But if you are home for COVID, then maybe that's the thing that you do at that time, and the rest of us kind of catch up to that later. So great question. I think these systems also benefit me, should I happen to need to miss some time away. So again, trying to think systemically.
Wow, thank you for that. And such inclusive practices. You spoke about from the Google Slides and having a space where everyone can contribute. So this leads to a question from Indira from Rhode Island and other people who are curious. How do we make human connection related to social emotional learning while being 6 feet apart and or masked and or virtual at home?
I love the layers of this question. Thank you for that, Indira. And I think it's great because honestly, I think a lot of really the core of what we do is about human connections. It's really at the heart of art education. And so I think it's also a good reminder for us to think about, there's a lot more, we already know this, but there's a lot more to making connections than just physical proximity. And to me, it's more about facilitating relationships in that learning space and then elevating to student voice and choice. And so again, for me in my space, this looks like dedicating time to making a classroom community. I like to start, each class period, or maybe I'll end class periods too, with some discussion-based prompting where we're just trying to get to know one another. And that just pays off dividends when we get to having harder conversations or about personal conversations about decisions in artwork. So starting with that kind of foundation. I also think that connection can look a lot like student agency and empowerment. And so I like to try to create opportunities in the space where kids can kind of co-construct the knowledge with each other and make sure that they have a platform to, share skills that they've learned or kind of feel, empowered to do so. And I think that is just built in relationship building when we're talking about young adults or young artists. And I love it too, because it models that we should be expected to learn from one another. And it's not just me that is passing down information in the space. Also related to connections, I think honestly having like an inviting classroom space is helpful. I think in my space, I kind of market it as being an open come on into the art studio space. And so, when I'm in there, I'm playing music, and naturally kids are going to come in and want to talk to me about what I'm listening to. If I'm playing the new Kanye album, right, they're going to ask what I think about it, or if I thought Drake's was better, and etc. And they want to talk to each other about that too. And another note I want to make about this is I think it brings a part of who I am or who we are into that learning space, because we can't be passive observers when we're trying to build a collaborative space. We need to be connected and making connections with kids as well. So finally, one more thing I want to say is that I think connection also, big picture wise, comes in the form of just embracing general humanity and the humanity of others. And so it's really important to me that I'm making sure that we have opportunities for students to see themselves in the art that we're exploring, and to visualize potential other life experiences. And to me, tapping into those is what makes connections too. Great question. Thank you.
Wow, Evan, I wish I were a student in your classroom, because that sounds so empowering and so inviting. And like you talked about building these human connections, and it really sounds like it's very cultural competent. So I heard your cultural competence coming into play. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. So with that said, Janet from Michigan wants to know strategies for focusing and keeping on task, getting back to face-to-face learning, especially for middle schoolers.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you. I did have the distinct privilege of teaching middle school for some time. And I think I want to start this by just recognizing again that it's important to be patient and recognize that this is a transition time for everybody. When I'm thinking about, for middle school, for example, like the last time a sixth grader may have been in a classroom space, may have been when they're in third or fourth grade. And so just developmentally, they may have been a very different place. So patience, I think, is a key thing here. In my own space, again, I'm introducing prompts and expectations gradually, kind of over time, not just loading all the expectations at once. And certainly in the very teacher fashion, like reiterating and maybe revisiting expectations frequently is a part of that. For me, trying to clarify and make sure that I'm clearly articulating my goals of the course, of the unit, of the lesson, so that kids have a sense of what we're doing and why, I find helps people stay on task. I'm thinking also about the flow of my space. Where do people kind of bunch up? Are there different places that different types of learning can happen within the space? And then how do I communicate how to use those spaces to students? Thank you for that.
Wow, thank you. With all of this outstanding teaching, well, you know the question I'm about to ask. So what are your tips for self-care?
Yeah, huge, super important for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned earlier, Wanda. For me, my self-care is I'm really double dipping into those creative habits, right? The painting, listening to music, as I mentioned before, making time to move my body, exercise. But I think the most consistent thing that I do are my nightly dance parties with my daughter. I have a 3, almost 4-year-old, and every night we listen to songs and we dance, and that's one of my favorite parts of the day.
Wow. Evan, I hate to let you go, but I thank you so much for your time. And at this point, I'm going to exit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Knight. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
It is my distinct pleasure now to welcome Ms. Laura Grundler into the conversation. She is a visual arts coordinator at the Plano Independent School District in Texas. Laura, I love everything that you are working on your website and blog, the creativity department. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Evan. I'm really excited to be here tonight.
Let's get into some questions from members. First one we have here is from Zarek in Georgia. And Zarek, the one and only, wants to know, is your school or school district using the arts to help people cope with this pandemic? And if so, in what ways?
I think exponentially use the arts to cope for students and community both. Some of the things that I would like to share are, we've done kindness cards. So every year we have we used to have this holiday greeting card and it didn't feel very inclusive. And we changed it to a district-wide kindness card contest that we could use these cards all year long, and they're student created and designed. And our school board members and our community members send them out and use them as a thank you note or whatever they are to send gratitude to people in the community. So kindness cards were kind of a huge creation out of this time. We, several of our schools do pinwheels for peace. World Peace Day was recently, and they were beautiful. There were pinwheels all over the schools, all over the yards. The American Love Project is an ongoing project, and I think that yes, there's a link in the chat about it. That many of our schools are doing that right now, and it's a way to really get kids to think about empathy and how to care for themselves as well as their community and take pride in who they are. And then we did so many things. We did heartgrams, which were another way for our students to tell first responders and community members thank you, and senior citizens, if they had been in lockdown for a long time, to send them love, to say, we're thinking about you, we care about you. So we did the heartgrams. And then in all other things, I work in the fine arts department, and we did all kinds of theater productions via Zoom, and we did concerts via Zoom, and we continue to have all of our art exhibits online. We posted them online in our school district. We just kept it going because kids thrive in the arts and our community thrives in the arts. And it's so necessary that we continue to keep that going. And in a way, we found it as a really great way to advocate for the importance that arts play in our lives. And if during the pandemic, when we were in more of a lockdown place, if you notice, there were a lot of people playing their guitars and making art and doing all of these things. And I think it was a great point of advocacy to say, look, these are the things that our kids do in the schools. And those are the things that are keeping you well during this time of difficulty. So we just continue to lean into that and get the arts out there as much as possible.
I love that, leaning into the community for connections and then for advocacy too. Thank you so much for that answer. Next question's coming in from Becky in New Hampshire, and she'd like to know, what tools from hybrid and remote learning are you maintaining to help in your teaching and curriculum?
Well, Becky from New Hampshire, Evan kind of alluded to this earlier, but a lot of the tools we learned during our time of virtual learning are great tools to continue to use. And some of the things we're continuing to use are a lot of the Google Classroom tools. We also do digital portfolios via Google Slides because it's super easy. And Google itself is a great teacher tool for teachers to connect. People don't really think about this, but one of the things that we did is that we used a Google Classroom for each course that we have, so that teachers could share materials that were already, for lack of a better word, Google-fied, so that they were easy to share for their students in their Google Classroom. And then we took it a step further and we created collaborative teams, or PLCs, whatever you like to call them. And our collaborative teams were our most important tool during the last 19 months, or we've been doing this, but everyone really took a time to be a team and to help each other and divide and conquer. Our elementary teams decided to take, one team took kindergarten, one team took first grade, and they all created lesson plans that could be used both hybrid and live. Our teachers had to do kids in the classroom as well as kids on the screen at the same time. And so they were looking to support each other in all of those difficult learning environments and trying to teach those things simultaneously. So they were continually rewriting curriculum and sharing that curriculum and supporting each other in a beautiful way. I really loved my middle school team because they started we also utilize Microsoft Teams. And so they started a group chat on Microsoft Teams. And to this day, they literally talk to each other every day. And somehow I got added to their group and I see their chatter all day long. And it's wonderful to see them supporting each other and taking care of each other. And some of it obviously is professional, but some of it is, hey, it's somebody's birthday and we just want to say happy birthday, And so it's all of those things. But I think the number one thing is really leaning into your team and collaborating and taking care of each other.
I love that, community care and that the collaborative nature of where you are sounds amazing. Thank you for that. Last one from a member here, Eliza from Vermont, is looking for ideas to preempt the I don't want to's and to keep even the most energetic, distractible artists engaged.
I think we've all had those kiddos that I don't want to use, I can't draw, I shouldn't be here, I didn't choose this class. Regardless of the difficult COVID times or not, we've had those kiddos. And I think alluding to you again, Evan, when you said the idea of co-constructing knowledge and really the idea of empowerment versus engagement, those are the things that are most important. So I think when you really build an environment where you get to know your kids and you build this environment where kids are constructing that knowledge together and you give them options and you build in student agency and you start to get to know what their likes and dislikes are so that you can guide them to make art that really speaks to their heart. And they need to know their why. Especially I was a 9th grade teacher before I moved into administration. And so I had kids in Art 1 and they were there because they needed their fine art credit in high school. Not all of them were there because they wanted to be there. And so I had to make sure to get to the why. Why is art important in your life? Why is art going to be important as you grow up? Why, everything we touch is designed by someone. So that, getting to that why, the core of, how does it affect me for a 9th grader is really important, and taking time to get to know them. Just like you said in your room, you set up this environment where it's a studio-based environment and people feel comfortable. When you get that comfortable environment going, kids are going to lean into it and get to really to a place where they're gonna try, they're gonna take risks, they're gonna put themselves out there more. So I think that there's a lot of things you can do, but the most important thing you can do is get to know your students, build those relationships, and take it from there.
Oh, so many gems there. Thank you so much. I highlighted, art teacher as a guide. I think that's beautiful, and knowing your why. Thank you. Laura, same question as we have been going here before. What are your tips for self-care?
So many. I visually journal. I have my journal right here. So I take my journal everywhere I go. I jot things down that make me feel better, or sometimes I just, like Wanda said, I scribble in it because that makes me feel better. So there's the visual journaling. I do make my own art. I do a lot of embroidery in my art. It's this crazy mixed media thing that I do. And the act of just sewing by hand is very therapeutic for me. I have 3 kids, so I'm in the car a lot, taking them to all their different places. I often take my dog with me, and when they go into swimming, I take the dog on a walk. I also take my art with me so I can sit and work on it while I'm waiting. I build in time for taking care of myself. But then there's also the silly things, right? Like I have 3 kids, 2 of them are girls, and they're at the age where, we've just started watching Gilmore Girls together. And so it's a time to zone out. And I think zoning out is really important too. Just this past Sunday, I did not look at my phone the entire day. And I think that taking that moment just to turn off those media channels, and this is coming from somebody who's kind of big on the social media stuff, like it's really important to just turn it off sometimes. Get away from your email, get away from your Facebook and your Twitter, and just take a break. And that can be such a rejuvenating experience.
That sounds awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Evan. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Dawn Massey. Dawn is from the Visual and Performing Arts Department in San Diego Unified School District, and he is a visual arts resource teacher. Welcome, Dawn.
Hey, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So excited you're here. Janice from Tennessee wants to hear, how do you motivate your students to do art when they are constantly being pulled out to work on their core classes?
Janice, that's a great question. Thank you. I think we really need to approach these things in a positive manner for our students. Remind the students that creativity doesn't stop when they leave the art room. They can tap into that creative drive and curiosity anywhere at any time. Keep it positive. I also think that in my elementary classroom, this is the first time I've been out of the classroom in 20 years. Geez. I had an open door policy at recess and lunch. And if students needed that additional time to complete visual arts assignments, they could come in and do so. And I think that them knowing that they had that extra time, that more time, definitely alleviated some student stress in those situations. Something else that's worked for me in the past, and it might not work for everybody depending on your scheduling situation, is that I would kind of flip that pull-out script around and arrange general classroom time later on in the week or a week after for small groups to come from the classroom to work, to have more time to work with the artistic process in my classroom. So kind of reversing it. And I think this is really important too. It's important for us to advocate for our programs and for our students. So you need to have a constructive conversation with those classroom teachers so that they understand the impact on student learning in the visual arts and in the creative and critical thinking processes. You know, the skills that they are practicing in our visual arts classes are concepts that cross boundaries, that work to improve their work in all academic areas. You know, so I think we really need to emphasize that aspect as well and continue to push for equitable arts education for everyone.
Fantastic. I love that you talked about advocating an equitable arts education for all. Molly from Kansas asks, how do you utilize visiting teaching artists or studio artists in non-art classrooms?
Hi, Molly. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so this is an interesting one, right? Because you're not just thinking about bringing them into our visual arts classroom. How are we doing it? How can you do it at the general classroom setting? And our district in particular has worked with teaching artists for many years in an arts integration model. Where teaching artists and grade level teachers collaborate and they build curriculum that integrates ELA and the arts. And not just visual arts, you've got dance, theater, and music, everything combined. And these experiences have been very well received by the students and teachers alike, the classes that are participating in them. And one other bonus is that it's enabled a lot of those classroom teachers to shake some of the fear of incorporating visual arts learnings into their curriculum. You know, they're lose that fear of trying it out when the teaching artist isn't there. And I think that's really important for us to emphasize and encourage of our classroom teachers. Our district also partners with lots of arts organizations in San Diego. We have, there's a lot out here, you know, museums and art ed nonprofits, things like that, where we bring arts programming into the general classrooms. Being a large city, like I said, we can tap into quite a few, but you know, no matter where you are, there are arts and cultural programs that you can tap into and create partnerships with. These partnerships over the years have taken different forms. Some bring arts programming, you know, directly into the grade level classrooms on a weekly and monthly basis throughout the year. Sometimes it's shorter, more like residencies at school sites. And there are also some organizations out here that have teaching artists, muralists, that bring mural programs to schools to improve the climate on campus and develop a stronger sense of pride of place and community. And some of these programs are supported through grants that the community partners and the district work on, and some of them create scholarship opportunities or reduce pricing for Title I programs as well.
Great resources. Daniela wants to know, what would be some important cultural topics to cover this coming school year?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to continue to look deep and reflect on our approaches to teaching and engaging all learners, you know, the kids that we're working with. I think, you know, Evan mentioned it previously, you know, working and developing a safe space for all our learners, you know, providing opportunities for students to bring their own stories to the visual arts curriculum. What are the stories that they have to tell, and giving them opportunities to do so. I think it's also important for us to acknowledge student decision-making and providing them opportunities to do that, where we're moving more towards a student-centered teaching approach. You know, what are we doing to empower our students so they have a voice in classroom matters and that they feel respected and valued? I think it's also important that we look at our students and make sure they're all represented in the visual arts curriculum. You know, so again, that they feel valued and loved. Providing students opportunities to see themselves and to see each other, I think is really, really important. And use this opportunity to learn about new artists that you might not have included in your curriculum previously. But as you do this, I think it's also very important that when you diversify the curriculum and you bring new things in, do it intentionally and equitably. You know, don't just share artists and movements and styles during certain months of the year. Do it all year long. And then circling back to the artists in the classroom, bringing artists in, you know, look towards your own arts community and culture for role models. Bring them into your school so that your students, you know, can see those role models and they can grow from those firsthand learning opportunities.
Such great tips already, everyone. But Dawn, I have to ask you, what are your tips for self-care?
Yeah, I think it, you know, echoing everybody tonight, make time to do what you love, you know, schedule time for you intentionally, you know. For me, you know, I like to, you know, in the evening and on the weekends, I make time to blend digital technology with traditional mediums, you know, but it also takes the form of family, you know, beach walks with our dogs and watching Lego Masters, Ted Lasso, and really anything Marvel related with the family. And another point too, as far as, you know, self-care, is don't be afraid to say no, especially this year. You know, we all have so much on our plates. We are all up to here, right? So think hard about the responsibilities that are being asked of you, you know, and really prioritize your mental health, the mental health of your students. You know, we certainly shouldn't just be jumping back into things like it was normal, because we're nowhere near that.
Thank you so much, Dawn.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Mario, welcome back.
Hey, Don, thanks.
Yeah, what a great conversation we're having.
I agree. Oh my gosh, I've taken so many notes. I've like filled up 3 pages in my notebook already.
All right, so there is one more question from the audience member for you. Donna from New Jersey is wondering, where can we find help with curriculum writing? Is there a training at the NAEA convention or elsewhere to address this?
Yep, that's a really great question, Dawn. And Donna, thanks for submitting that. So, you know, this is something we hear a lot from members. And, you know, because we realize that curriculum writing is such an ongoing cyclical process, right? Whether it's formal with your district or much larger in terms of like a national core art standards, these things happen again and again. And so one of the things that I always like to emphasize is that, you know, the art educator community that you can find within NAEA, it really, there's so many options and approaches that you can find at convention, just for example, and you find folks sharing their best practices. And, you know, curriculum takes different forms depending on the geography or the district or the purpose that drives it. So I really urge folks to look at our recorded webinars and recorded webcasts, to search our site, to look for a variety of practices across convention. And then we just today got news of some grant funding that's going to really help to support building in approaches that marry social emotional learning with equity, diversity, inclusion, and teacher leadership. So we're hoping that there's some more curriculum and practice that comes out of that as well. So stay tuned.
Wow, so many resources. That's fantastic.
There are a lot, yes.
What are the biggest challenges you see for art? What are the biggest challenges you see art educators facing today? Do you have any strategies for navigating these, the ones that you see?
Yep. So I think what I see matches what I'm hearing from folks on the ground, which is there's no daily norm right? There's no normal day or week or month anymore, right? Everything is about sort of responding to the present moment and inventing solutions. So I would like to think, because we're all, as art educators, we're just good at problem solving and navigating those things and being really, we're tired of the word nimble and pivoting, but we're good at that. We were already good at that. I think we've built up those muscles even more so that we have some strategies for what we're facing right now in, end of September 2021. Paired with that, I think I find it hard to listen to folks' stories where it's like, what's my next step? How do I navigate this on my own? I need some backup and support. So, I was one of those art teachers. I had at the time, what felt like an awesome basement art room with a door that went right outside to the parking lot, and I could close that door and just make art. But at the same time, as much as that was great, I also felt a little isolated and alone and was in search of colleagues. So I think what folks are facing is continued challenge, right? And continued need to invent and address things. And what I always urge folks to do is lean on your colleagues, right? And hopefully there's somebody in your school or in your district, it may be in the arts, maybe outside of the arts, but if you're having a hard time, any of us, I know on this town hall right now, any of us would help you to connect to somebody who's in a very similar situation, right? Because I know that I always want to find a school that's similar to mine, right? I want to find someone who's in a role similar to mine so that really resonates with me. So I think leaning into our community, leaning into our colleagues, and finding folks who maybe have something similar and can share strategies. Because the bottom line is you're not alone, right? The NAEA has over 16,000 members, but there's thousands more out there that are in the art education ecosystem. So, my message is you're not alone, lean on your colleagues, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, those are all great tips. That connection and, kind of leaning into our community is so important during this time. So overall, what are you hearing as trends and takeaways from the conversation we're having?
So get ready. This is my list from our rehearsal and from tonight. So these are my key takeaways. I love this idea of building and maintaining emotional resilience, focusing on solutions, not complaints, practicing mindfulness, having the attitude of gratitude. Art helps us face difficult truths, making the art experience more accessible, thinking systemically, focusing on student agency and empowerment, the kindness cards, leaning into the community for connections, the value of collaborative teams and PLCs. I really love this. Kids need to know their why. I feel like I can make a t-shirt out of that, right? Like there's something about, like needing to know your why. The concepts in the art room cross boundaries. The equitable arts education for all, developing a sense of pride in the community, looking deep and reflecting on our practices. And then there's this whole piece around like beyond student empowerment, like really honoring student voice and decision making and ensuring that they see themselves, right? And then the last one that I captured was how do we have intentional equity all year long? I mean, talk about curriculum. I feel like we just started to write a curriculum map for professional growth for an art educator right there, right? Like, how do we explore these concepts? So I'm really so appreciative for each of you for sharing your ideas and your wisdom.
All right. So final question. What are your tips for self-care?
So I have to say, I am also a big fan of Ted Lasso and Marvel. So those two things do definitely take up a lot of my time, but my goodness, I cannot get through an episode of Ted Lasso without crying. That last one really got me. So I don't need to do any more commercial for that. But I really love to sew. So like Laura, gosh, hand stitching is so therapeutic, and that's how I can practice mindfulness. But I also love Halloween. So I am currently contemplating what my Halloween costumes might be and how I'm going to sew them. And sometimes I like to give myself the challenge of I'm not allowed to purchase any new materials or fabric. I have to use everything that I can find at home. I've made some really mean Star Wars costumes out of curtains and towels. So I'm curious to see what I'm going to come up with this year for Halloween, but that's helping me kind of keep focused and have a daily practice for the next month.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, Mario, for the questions and for reflecting with us.
Thank you, Don. Great talking to you. So I invite our whole community to join me in a virtual thunderous round of applause for all of our guests that joined us tonight. So please join me in thanking Wanda and Laura and Don and Evan for a really great conversation. I hope you're all filled with great ideas for the start of the school year and beyond. So you have our gratitude. I want to acknowledge and thank board members that have joined us, past and present. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And we are going to go ahead and go to our closeout slides. We have a number of things that we would like to share with you. And the first one is that immediately you can find this handy dandy handout of tonight's conversation, where our 4 guests have shared some tips for back to school and support resources and self-care. So you can scan this QR code. You can also find this on our NAEA Town Hall website. And then if you are finding that good energy and that good fit and connection with your art educator, art teacher community, like we all find, please consider joining NAEA or renewing. We often have a lot of good mix of members and non-members at our town halls. And, please know, I personally and the association is so dedicated to the field of art education and helping us to grow and sustain and thrive. And when we're working arm in arm together, that's how we can do that. So lots of great ways to connect and to benefit. We have you may or may not know, we have an awesome set of national awards that NAEA gives each year. It happens in March at convention, but there's a nomination process where members can nominate folks for these awards. And they come with recognition, street cred to take back to your school and your home district. Some of them actually come with some cash, but these recognitions have so much value and they're cross categories. And sometimes they're not as well known about with every corner of the association as they could be. So I really like to promote these. And we're extending the deadline a month till November 1, because we really want to make sure that folks have a chance to be honored. And you're going to hear about convention in a second, so I'm going to hold off, but please consider nominating somebody for an award. Upcoming webinar on Wednesday, October 6th. This one is entitled Not a Toolkit, and it is unpacking and thinking with, through, and against whiteness. So please consider joining us. It's an equity, diversity, inclusion focused webinar. And a need to know webcast focusing on artist, ecological issues, and activism, October 28th from 7 to 9 p.m. That one is free for everyone. Our next town hall, I'm really excited about this one. It's art education and design, and we're looking at student pathways. So this one is really exploring what are those design pathways, not just in a school career, but in actual job and career. And so we're going to have a mix of design professionals as well as our honor society teachers and students. So we're really excited to have student voice at that upcoming October 19th town hall. And we're really excited to see the National Art Honor Society and Junior Art Honor Society sort of regain its momentum. We've had some limitations with COVID the past couple years for those groups to be able to meet, and we are finding them regathering. So please consider forming a chapter and gathering your students. I'm so passionate about Honor Society because I love the idea of arts being in service to your community, right? And so many of our young artists whether they pursue the arts or not beyond, they have a passion for the arts, and there's a way to come together for art making, but also to give back to your local community and families. And then everyone's favorite location for convention, New York City. It was I know it's the first convention I went to was in New York, but in March 3 to 5 of 2022, we're going to be gathering in person for our New York National Convention and celebrating our 75th anniversary. But there are 3 options for the 2022 convention. So you can go live in person in New York. You can do live in person in New York and add a virtual component. So you have access to specific virtual offerings, but also anything that's been pre-recorded or any of the special sessions that are recorded and available later. Or you can choose the virtual option, which is you could watch from the comfort of your home, and you'll get access to sessions that are live streamed, and to keynotes that are live streamed, and artist talks that are live streamed. And again, those things would be available through pre-record and in a virtual library. Anybody that chooses any of the virtual options will have access to that content through August of that year of 2022. So tons of professional development and a way to both experience that live and that the recorded. So we know that we have, more than 800 concurrent sessions. It's more than you could possibly eat. Our eyes are bigger than our stomachs. But through this option, you can actually attend all your favorites in person, but get all the other ones that you weren't able to go to virtually or through recorded. So we're really excited to offer multiple. It's sort of like choose your own adventure convention. It's not a one size fits all. It's what best suits you. And I think that brings us to our close. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us. We love seeing our community together. Take care and be safe.